Yeah, I think you can say that about all of these thinkers. As we get into the sub virtues, we'll see this coming to light. You're right. It's not just tamping down. It's not just a negative thing. It's something that allows us to be more what we're supposed to be. Now, coming back to the frugality thing, so Cicero is going to talk about like there's like frugality, let's call it capital F, where it is just another name for temperance. And there, the associations that we have with like how we spend money or things like that are not helpful because it's more like he's talking about something different. But then sort of like let's call it lowercase frugality. I think you're right. It's a matter of what we do, like where we indulge ourselves and where we don't. Like I can have the slice of cake and I don't have to say, oh no, no cake for me ever, something like that. I just can't have as many slices as I want, right? And that would be that's not only frugality in the sense of like temperance, controlling myself, but if I eat too much cake now, there's no cake left for me later, or there's no cake for anybody else in the house. So yeah, the frugality thing is kind of a cool addition. So
Appreciated that one.
yeah, and the Romans, I mean, he's living in Rome, right? So like the center of the world as far as they're concerned, when he's not being exiled by Roman emperors for, being kind of a tough guy with them. And in Rome, like if you're poor, okay, you don't have a lot of opportunities. Just like if you're poor in our society, you have much more constrained opportunities. But it was a thing where if you were middle class or upper class, you could, I mean, they had practices of like having dinners where you would like literally eat until you needed to go and, into the vomitorium, the room specifically for throwing up, and you'd throw up so you could go back and indulge yourself some more. And the Roman cookbooks that we have are just crazy stuff. They were like, let's see how many different ways we can cook mice. And if you think about our society, right? So we fortunately, except in, places that we call food deserts, we have lots and lots of access to food. And, the amount of flavors, just thinking back from when I was a kid, and I remember, so here's kind of a silly example that we can't derive too much, but I remember when bubblegum quit being just bubblegum flavored. And at first there were things like grape flavored, and we're like, holy crap, amazing. It doesn't have to just taste like sugar, or whatever it is that bubblegum is supposed to be. And then, the industry just put out any sort of thing that you could possibly think about as a flavor because they're all, chemically produced basically, right? They're all, when they say artificial flavors, they're all things that they've derived. And you think about our availability of drinks, you walk into a convenience store and there's like an entire, wall of things that you can buy to drink. And some of them are energy drinks and some of them are coffee drinks and teas and sodas of different sorts and even like flavored waters. And, we have so much that we could indulge in. And yeah, you're going to eat probably 3 times a day, maybe more, depending on what you do. Now, it's interesting that you brought that up as the opportunity because we also have one other thing where perhaps we need temperance even more, and it's our cell phones. Because, people have noted if you want to produce addiction through dopamine loops and stuff like that, apps are incredible for that because you can be on it, flipping through it, not just like 3 times a day but 100 times in an hour. And people have noted this with things like dating. I know a bit about dating apps because I had a client who wanted at one point to try to create a Tinder killer by producing an ethical dating app, and it never went anywhere. But I had to do a lot of research on what people actually use dating apps for. And it turns out that there's quite a few who have no intention of dating anybody and they just use it for entertainment. They just like flip through it, looking at people like 100 an hour, And so the things that we have the most opportunity to indulge in, maybe that's where we need temperance the most. It could also be like thinking about like the people who you go onto Netflix and now this goes kind of the procrastination thing, although it's not exactly the same thing as procrastination. People go on to Netflix or Hulu or pick whatever other streaming thing, and they just like scroll through all the different available things and they never watch anything. It's like an hour later and they're like, yeah, I'm not going to actually watch any of this. It's time to go to bed. I mean, maybe not as such, but in certain ways. Uh, I mean, you could think about it as a strategy that people sometimes use when it comes to making decisions for the better. Like I'm going to start moderating what I eat, but I'll do that tomorrow. And then tomorrow shows up, and then you don't do it. I guess that could be that, but I don't know that procrastination just by itself. I think, that would probably fit more under courage, right? The industriousness, the Philoponia, if procrastination is about putting off the things that you know you need to do, it would be a failure of courage. There is a type of procrastination though that stems from perfectionism. I see this with a lot of my students.
About
So,
this
so the
philosophy in
question about
particular.
whether there's similar things, yeah, there's lots of different philosophical schools. As a matter of fact, most of the important philosophical schools of antiquity had a path like that. So Plato, you get a bit of that, but with the later Platonists, you get a lot more of that. So Plutarch, for example, is an example. With Aristotle, you kind of have to derive it from what he's saying, but there's later Aristotelians who applied that sort of thing. The Epicureans seem to have had stuff like that, but we've lost almost all the stuff they wrote, right? So that's kind of a problem. And we have with the Cynics, we have later Cynic writings, and we have what are called the pseudo-Cynic letters attributed to Diogenes and Crates. And no scholar thinks that they actually wrote these, but it's part of the Cynic community, and they have similar like pathways, right? And then that continues on into early Christian engagements with ancient philosophy and through the Middle Ages. And we even see this in modern philosophy. There's a lot of stuff that doesn't get taught because philosophers academically are much more interested in like the theoretical than the practical, right? Or if they're interested in the practical, just give me the ethics and that's it, but not a lot of philosophy as a way of life. But there are a lot of things like that out there. So yeah, but the Stoics, fortunately, we have a lot of the stuff that they did. So yeah, this is one of these things where, and now existentialists, there's no card carrying existentialist because there's a million different kinds of existentialism when you read around in the thing, right? Are you a Kierkegaardian, a Nietzschean, a Chestovian, a Camusian? So they don't all agree, but you can say there is this overarching thing on, um, not allowing social conventions to define you, on authenticity. That is really central. This is a place where the existentialists and the Stoics are going to go separate paths. The Stoics do think that you need to maintain yourself within these limitations, and that it is, like you put, it is going to be a way to have virtue and inner peace. And you could say the existentialists are probably also on the matter of emotions too, they're not going to be on the same page as the Stoics. And you gotta say, well, I'm going to go this way or I'm going to go this way. You can't effectively have it both ways. And that's fine. if everybody was in full agreement, we wouldn't have different philosophies. And you can say similar things about the Aristotelians and the Stoics as well. There's going to be some things where Aristotle's going to go this way and the Stoics are going to go this way, and you got to pick one or the other. But you don't have to up to that point, you don't have to throw away anything. You can say Stoicism and existentialism are compatible to this point, right? Or in these ways. Now about a synthesis between the views. So if a synthesis is supposed to have everything that everybody offers, because you have to choose between them, you probably can't have that kind of synthesis, right? This is something I've thought about quite a bit because I describe myself as an eclectic, as was Cicero, by the way. And so you can say, well, I like this big chunk of this person or this group's philosophy, and I like this big chunk, and by the way, they're compatible here. And then, you got to kind of pick and choose. You got to eclectane, select which things you think are really the most important, valuable to you. And if authenticity is the most important thing, then that's probably where you got to leave the Stoics behind, just as Cicero does when it comes to epistemology. He likes the Stoics' ethics a lot, but he's an academic skeptic when it comes to epistemology. And he's like, these Stoics, they say that we can have absolutely certain knowledge of things. Man, I don't think that's possible, and that's okay. That's what we do in philosophy. It's not just sort of eclecticism in the sense of a little bit of this and a little bit of this and a little bit of this. It's making a real effort to try to identify what's most true and what's most valuable for you. So if you are a card-carrying existentialist, you're probably going to have to leave the Stoics behind when it comes to the personal freedom, authenticity, and like you said, intense and unrestrained experiences, which are probably going to include emotions. So you're not going to be able to accept, I think, the Stoic overall viewpoint on the emotions, and that's fine. They don't have the market cornered necessarily on getting the emotions right. Where the Stoics really shine, I would say, is in giving us practices and perspectives that we can use to work on the stuff that we want to work on, So you don't have to necessarily buy that anger is always a bad thing to take Seneca's work on anger and say, wow, this is a good useful practice. This is a good one. I'm going to apply these sorts of things. And you can do that while also bringing in Aristotle and Plutarch, the Platonist, and later Christian thinkers, or even existentialists, like somebody who talks about anger a good bit in ways that I think are helpful is Nietzsche, also Dostoevsky, and Notes from the Underground. And they might all be useful in giving you a toolbox, right? That you can use. But the overall theoretical perspective, you're not going to be able to completely synthesize. So that's an interesting question. So discipline, ascesis, or disciplina, doesn't get called a sub-virtue in any of the Stoic literature. It's more like something that you do, and you could be doing ascesis with any of the virtues. So it's not going to be a sub-virtue, but you could say it's what you have to do in order to cultivate the virtues. But you do raise an interesting other question. Could there be a sub-virtue that fits under more than one of the cardinal virtues? And with temperance, with a few of the things that Cicero is saying, it kind of looks like, some of his discussions almost make it sound like it's not that there's a sub-virtue that's under two virtues, but the way he characterizes temperance is like a ordo or as frugalitas. it's encompassed in the other virtues. But that might be a matter of like the unity of the virtues thesis, which we're going to talk about next class. There's this idea that the Stoics, and not just the Stoics, have, that if you got one virtue, you have to have all of them, right? And I'll level with you. I don't think that's realistic. But it is definitely a position that they advocate. So we'll look at why they do that and whether or not it's a reasonable position to hold or not. So any